Calificas para ser legal. ¿Quieres saber? Solo llama al abogado Andrés Mejer.
Good morning and welcome to the English version of our weekly radio program, Para Ser Legal. Today, we're going to be dealing with three main subjects. First, how do large number of undocumented immigrants enter the U.S.? Second, if you enter the U.S. legally, how do you extend it? How do you stay in the U.S. longer than the time that you were allowed to do so? And the third, why should no immigrant attend an immigration interview under the Trump administration without an attorney? I'm going to give you some horror stories. So, my name is Andrés Mejer. I'm a speaker, published author, and immigration attorney. I lived in Chile twice, in Israel twice, in the US twice. I came to the States as a child not speaking English. I moved to Israel as an adult not speaking Hebrew. If there's a mistake an immigrant can make, I've done it at least once. I became an immigration attorney to help people like you avoid the mistakes that my family made. So, segment number one. How do large number of undocumented immigrants enter the United States? Well, this is kind of a trick question because they actually enter legally. They come through a port of entry, usually an airport. It could be at a border where they present themselves and they present a passport or a visa and they enter the U.S. and they're given a certain period of time to enter the U.S. Now, just last week, President Trump promised to crack down on legal immigration. He signed a new order giving Department of State and Department of Homeland Security 4 months to do something about legal immigrants overstaying their visa. That's the key. They entered legally. They were given 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Usually it's about 180 days or less to enter the U.S. And then they violated the terms of that visa by staying past the amount of time they're allotted to. Now, I'm not talking about a day or two. We're talking about, staying indefinitely. So what are the consequences if you stay past your allotted time? Well, if we're talking about a couple of days and you have a documented reason, probably none. Typically, if you stay more than 6 months and you leave, there shouldn't be any consequences as long as you explain why you overstayed. Now, doctor's issue, went to the hospital, gave birth, sick relative. You got to document, you got to present something when you try to come back. If you stay over if you stay over 180 days, over 6 months, you can't come back for 3 years. Even if your visa is for 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years, it doesn't matter because when you try to come in, the agent at Customs Border Patrol will put you on a plane and send you back. They'll deny you entry. So if you stay over 6 months, you can't come back for 3 years. If you stay over a year, you can't come back for 10 years. Now, between 2016 and 2017, there are 1.2 million foreigners who overstayed their visas. Nearly half of the 11 undocumented immigrants entered the U.S. legally and overstayed those visas. Hey, my family was one. We came to the U.S. in 1981. We were given 6 months, and here we are over 30 years later. It's an exaggeration. We actually left and came back a couple of times in between then because, we couldn't make up our minds what country to live in. But all kidding aside, my family had an opportunity to gain legal status in '86, thanks to President Reagan. We applied, and we were ultimately approved, and we got our green cards. That is not true for everyone. Matter of fact, that's not true for the majority of immigrants. We have 11 million undocumented immigrants because in the past 17, 18 years, there has been no way for them to normalize their legal status. Now, illegal immigration or undocumented immigration is at historic lows, but the majority of new undocumented immigrants are entering legally and overstaying. Why is that? Because for the past 5-6 years, even under Obama, the apprehension rates at the southern border have gone up, and up. And Trump has only increased that. Well, actually, he still hasn't met Obama's numbers, but he is deporting more people than Obama did. Common misconception, they called Obama the deporter-in-chief because of the number of people that he was deporting. They were significant numbers, much more. So in Obama's 8 years, he deported more people than the combined number under both Presidents George Bush 8 years and President Clinton's 8 years. According to other reports, in the past year, 210,000 entered illegally. That means they did not present themselves at a port of entry, but 410,000 entered legally and overstayed. So Trump's executive order, again, everything he does through executive order, since he's, for whatever reason, unable to pass any legislation, gives Department of State and Department of Homeland Security 4 months to come up with a plan to reduce this. In the meantime, there's things that they're supposed to do immediately, like punishing countries who a majority or a large number of their visa entrants overstay. Now, the majority of it seems to be focused on Africa, at least from my reading of the memorandum. And at the end of the day, how effective that's going to be, since Africa isn't sending the majority of immigrants into the U.S. But we'll see what the plan is going to be in 4 months. One thing's for sure, it's going to make things difficult for a lot of people, including some that have been coming and going for years legally. There's going to be problems at the airports, so you just need to be prepared. So that was question number 1. For those of us that just joined us, we discussed how large numbers of undocumented immigrants enter the U.S. The answer was through airports, through ports of entry. I know, surprising, huh? Second issue that we're dealing with today: how to extend your stay if you entered legally. Now, there's a number of different ways. So first of all, look, if you did not enter legally, obviously, it's very difficult to extend a illegal entry into a legal entry. It's possible. Marry a U.S. citizen. Employment can't help you, but victim of a violent crime. If you're here over 10 years and you have a child with severe medical condition, if you are applying for asylum, if you're a victim of a violent crime, or you are in an abusive relationship with a green card or U.S. citizen spouse. So there's a number of, that's called VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act. There's a number of ways to convert a illegal entry into a legal residency. That's not what I'm talking about today. We've talked about in other segments. Today, I'm talking about what happens if you come in as a tourist for 3 months or 6 months, and you have a need to overstay it, or you decide, give you an example. Let's say I'm from Venezuela, and my life's in fear. And I have a visa because I'm a journalist. I've been entering in and out of the U.S. for many years. I need to get out of my country right now because the government's looking for me. I get on a plane, I leave. I don't make any plans about what's going to happen in the future. I just know I have to leave. So I do that. And I think, well, maybe I'll be able to come back in 2 weeks. Maybe I'll come back in 3 weeks. Maybe in a month. And all of a sudden, well, things don't change. Things don't get better. What am I going to do? Well, I can apply to legally extend it. I can apply to change my status to something else. So let's first talk about I want to extend my stay. So it's Form I-539. It's a change of status. So in this case, I'm asking the U.S. government to extend my legally permitted stay to a greater amount for a specified reason. It can't just be, I like it here. I want to stay longer. You could do that, but you got to say, well, I'm attending this conference. I've been on the East Coast. Now I want to visit the West Coast. Here are the dates and times. Here's what I need. Here's how much time I need. Here's the reason why I'm doing it. There needs to be a stated purpose, and it needs to be reasonable. It can't be just because I want to. I don't even think that would have worked out under Obama. You need to say a specified reason. Usually it's for humanitarian reasons. It's for job-related reasons. Or it's an education-related reason. I'm giving a TV appearance. I'm attending a conference. It needs to be something that's documented and proven and discernible. Here's the amount of time I'm staying for. Here's why. So I'm looking at schools. Another visa, another way to extend your stay is to apply for a student visa. So let's say I enter the U.S. I'm given 3 months because I am from Spain. So I don't have to apply for a visa. I just present my passport. Automatically, I get 90 days. No more, no less. I get 90 days. So I come in. I like it here. I'm visiting, let's say, my cousins. It's the summer. And they convince me, why don't you apply for some schools here? I mean, you speak English because you've been traveling. You see us every year. Why don't you take a year or two, study from college here? Well, that's interesting. So that summer, I'm going to go around. I'm going to go to visit some schools. I'm going to apply. Let's say I'm accepted. Now that I'm accepted, well, I need to change my visa. I came in as a tourist, meaning it is my intention to come into the United States for a finite period of time, 90 days or less, and at the end of which I'm going to go back to my country where I'm a citizen. Now I want to change that to I want to come and study in the U.S. for a finite period of time, and at the end of that, I want to go back to my country. So the school will not apply to change my status if I'm in the U.S. If I travel back to my country, most colleges or universities have a foreign student department. They will apply for a form I-20 for me to enter the U.S. as a student. It's not done by an attorney. It's done by an employee who does, hundreds of these every year. That's pretty much all they do. So if I'm outside the U.S., the school will apply for me to enter the U.S. with a student visa. It's called an F1 visa. But if I'm in the U.S., they won't do that. You have to do it yourself, or you will need an attorney. Now, the form to do that is the same I-539 we just spoke about, the change of status. So one form has multiple uses. But here, because it makes no darn sense, you need to fill it out twice. I know, that doesn't make any sense, but yeah, you got to do it twice. And you got to pay 2 filing fees. The first is because you need to extend your stay from now until the semester begins. So if you entered in June and the semester begins in October, I'm making it up, right? So I made sure that's more than 90 days. So now you can't just stay, because if you overstay, you can't convert your status from a tourist to a student. So instead, you need to apply to extend your tourist visa up until the beginning of the school year. Then you need to apply to change your status. You're filing both at the same time. The same I-539, you say, listen, I want to change my status from a tourist to a student. Now, often both will be approved. The problem is things are delayed so much under the Trump administration that it could be the semester has already begun before you've been approved. That's a real challenge nowadays. But tourist to student is an option. Now, there are many others. Let's say I'm visiting my cousin, but I meet the woman of my dreams, and we decide. We've known each other for a long time. We've corresponded. I come, she proposes. Imagine that, or I propose in the spur of the moment. The thought of leaving and not seeing her for another year says, you know what? Will you marry me? And she says yes. Great. Now what? Where am I going to live? What am I going to do? I'm supposed to leave in 2 days. What am I doing? So my spouse can apply for me. As long as my spouse is a U.S. citizen, I will be able to adjust my status in the U.S. within the span of about a year, and I'll become a lawful permanent resident. So typically what happens is she files for me. I get fingerprinted about 2 weeks later. About 2 weeks after that, this is normal. This is a normal time period, but again, there's nothing normal in the Trump administration. So first I get the thank you notice, we accept your payment. Then 2 weeks later I get the biometrics notice, that's where they're going to fingerprint me. Then it should be within 2 months I get work authorization. It should be within 3 to 5 months after I get work authorization, I have an interview. At the interview, and we've talked about this process many times on this show, at the interview we go and the officer is going to determine 2 things really. One, is this relationship legitimate? Meaning, did we only get married to give me an immigration benefit, Or is this a bona fide marriage which just happens to be an immigrant rather than the principal reason for the marriage is because I'm an immigrant? Assuming we convince the officer that it's legitimate, that we love each other, that this is this was inevitable, then it's, well, am I admissible into the United States? Now, there's many things that can make me inadmissible. For example, crimes, entries and exits in the U.S., overstaying visas, lying to an officer, like at the interview. There's a number of reasons that could disqualify me from staying in the U.S. And today, disqualified means being placed in removal proceedings and deported back to my country. In this case, we're talking about Spain. Now, there are other options also. An employment-based petition. Let's go back to my initial example. I'm a journalist from Venezuela fleeing my country. I could apply for asylum, but that's a long, drawn-out process. Maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I'm going to go and I'm going to get hired by a TV or newspaper that needs an expert on Venezuela. Hey, that's me. I lived it. I'm a journalist. I was reporting on it. My life is in danger because of it. So there's a visa that's available for that. Let's say I'm Canadian or Mexican. Well, I can apply under NAFTA as a professional. I still need an employer to sponsor me. There's also an H-1B, a specialty occupation. I'm a journalist. I have a college degree. The problem with an H-1B is you have to apply in April. In the beginning of April. It's a lottery. There's only 65,000 that's allowed. Another 20,000 is reserved for master holder. For those that have a master's or PhD program or more. So it's limited and it's a lottery. I'm applying in April for a job starting in October. So there's definitely limitations there. Now there's also L1 visa. That's where my business, where my employer is applying to move me because I'm an executive and a manager from one office to another, which happens to be in a different country. So all of those are options to extend a legal stay in the United States. I entered legally for reasons that I can document and prove. I now want to change my status from a temporary visitor to a more permanent visitor. Not necessarily permanent. Green card is, but student visa or NAFTA is not necessary, or H-1B is not necessarily permanent. It's just a longer period of time. So for those that just joined us, I'm Andrés Mejer. I'm an immigration attorney. We started off the show by talking about how do large numbers of undocumented immigrants into the United States legally. Segment number 2, we talked about how to extend that legal entry into the United States, and we spoke about a family-based petition like a spousal, student visa. We spoke of how to extend your status, and also some employment-based visas that can extend my stay into the United States. So for our last segment of the day, I want to talk about why no one, and I mean absolutely no one, should go to an immigration interview without an attorney. I don't care if you're applying for your citizenship, or you're applying for your green card, or you're applying for asylum. It doesn't matter what it is. You should not go at all if you don't have an attorney. You're better off extending it. Nothing good is going to happen to you if you go there with an attorney. Now, in past segment, we talked about not exactly the same thing. If someone's in removal proceedings, if they have an attorney, 48% of the time, they win. If they don't have an attorney, 4% of the time. So you're 12 times more likely to succeed if you have an immigration attorney. Now, not all attorneys are the same. Some of them are better than others. Some of them, I'd love to say that all immigration attorneys care and work hard and are diligent, but the reality is not all mechanics are the best. Not all soccer players are fantastic. Not all surgeons do the same job. Guess what? Attorneys are the same thing. Not all attorneys are made equal. Put that issue aside for the moment. I'm going to give you 2 examples of why. Unfortunately, these are horror stories. These are 2 scenarios that could have been avoided had they gone to their interview with an attorney. First, let's talk about George. George, been here for a long time, 25 years, married to a U.S. citizen, entered the United States legally, but overstayed their visa. That's what we've been talking about this whole program. So entered legally, very important. Now, about 15 years ago, he purchased a birth certificate and passport from a Puerto Rican male. He used that documentation to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and apply for a driver's license. And he said, yes, I'm Paul Nebb. That's me. I'm joking. Thank you, Paul, for listening and for watching. But he came and he presented documentation saying he was someone other than who he was. Now, the Department of Motor Vehicles were suspicious. For whatever reason, we don't know why. Officer came over, put him into a room, interviewed him, and charged him with presenting fake documents. We don't know what tipped him off. I only know the outcome. Now, he hired a criminal defense attorney. He went to court. He applied for what's called pretrial intervention, meaning he did not accept culpability. He was put in probation for a year. He completed that probation. His charges were dismissed. So now, no convictions on his record whatsoever. He was arrested, but he was not found guilty. Married to a U.S. citizen, his spouse files for him, all without an attorney. He goes to the interview, again, without an attorney, with his wife. The officer says, you know what, I believe you. You guys have 2 kids. This relationship is legitimate. But let me ask you something. Tell me what happened, in 2001. So George proceeds to explain, well, I bought these documents from a Puerto Rican man. I presented those documents to the Department of Motor Vehicles in order to get a driver's license. And the officer asked him, well, why'd you do that? Well, I really needed a driver's license. Well, why'd you need that? Well, I had a job and I needed to work. And I had to support myself and my family. I was sending money back home. I needed a good paying job. In order to get a good paying job, I needed a driver's license. So he says, okay, now let me see that I understand this correctly. You presented documents that weren't yours. Yes. You did that in order to get a benefit. Yes. That benefit was material to you, correct? Yes. Well, do you mind signing a document to that effect? Oh, sure, no problem. By signing that document, he now admitted to misrepresenting himself to be a U.S. citizen. I mean, there's almost nothing worse in immigration. There is no waiver for that. Had he had an attorney, none of those questions would have been answered. It would have been, officer, he was not convicted. Well, what about officer, he was not convicted. He's not answering any questions to that effect. Period. End of story. That's what would have happened if I had been there, or any decent immigration attorney would have been there. Instead, he signed a document admitting that he misrepresented himself, meaning he lied, that he lied to a government agency saying he was a U.S. citizen when he wasn't. That makes him inadmissible, period. No waiver, no solution. Today he's placed in removal proceedings. And he does not, and that is a negative factor against him in any process or petition that he files. Totally unnecessary. He didn't know. He didn't know where the officer was taking him. He didn't know what the consequences of signing the document. Now, he could have said, well, hold on a second, I'm sorry. I think I need an attorney. I'm not going to answer any questions without my attorney. He didn't do that either. So he came to us after the fact. We ordered all the documents. We reviewed it and realized, I can't fix this. There are some things I can't undo. It's unfortunate. It's terrible. But that's what happened. Now, let me give you another example. Let's talk about Maria. I know. Every male case is George. Every male case is Maria. I do that to protect my clients' privacy and confidentiality. I'm not going to share their intimate lives with their real names with you guys. I will give you case studies with George and Maria. So every case sounds like George and Maria. Maria, 3 United States citizen children. The oldest is 22. The middle son is 19 and is a Marine. So she entered the United States illegally. meaning she did not present herself at the border. She entered, she was not caught, she stayed. Well, at least that's what she claimed. So her son applies for her to get parole in place. Parole in place is protection from deportation for immediate family members, like parents of children who are serving the military. The idea is nobody should risk their life for their government while being afraid that their family is going to be deported while they're serving. So she applied for parole in place. She asked when she entered the United States. She said, I entered once in 1996. She was approved. With that approval, she was now paroled into the United States. That means she was granted a legal entry. With that legal entry, her U.S. citizen daughter, who's over 21 years old, can apply for her to get her green card, to become a lawful permanent resident of the United States. Fine. Does that. Goes to the interview. At the interview, the officer asks her, when was your last entry into the United States? 1986. No, I asked you when's your last? 1986. Are you sure? Yeah, I never left the United States. So wait a minute. You entered 1986? Yes. Did you ever leave? No. Did you ever re-enter? No. Are you sure? No. Then shows her a photo. Is this you? I'm not sure. Well, this came up with your fingerprints. Oh yeah, that's me. Well, can you explain to me how you were caught at the border in July 2000? I'm not sure. Are you sure about that? Because on your document, you just told me you only entered once. When I asked you, you told me you only entered once. And that was in 1986, and here you have 14 years later. What happened? Oh, I left. What do you mean you left? Well, you mean you left the United States? Yes. She said her father was dying and ultimately did die. And she buried her father. So all of that is understandable. The problem is she now just lied to a U.S. officer. Number one, that makes her inadmissible. Number two, she entered the United States as an adult, was here for over a year in 1997, left in 2000, means she was here for at least 3 years as an adult without permission. She could not re-enter for 10 years unless she applied and received a waiver. She didn't do that. She was caught at the border, sent back, not deported, just sent back, and then 2 days later she re-entered the United States. So now she's inadmissible for what's called multiple entries, and there's no waiver for that. Now she gets put in removal proceedings. So all of that could have been avoided had she spoken to counsel, had she been honest with her attorney and explained what her circumstances were, because that petition should not have been filed. She should have stayed with parole in place, period, and been happy to do that. A matter of fact, the attorney should have requested all of her prior documentation to see if there's any evidence of any entries or exits. It's unfortunate, but she's now inadmissible to the United States, and she might be placed in removal proceedings. So thank you for watching. I'm Andrés Mejer, and until next time.
Calificas para ser legal, quieres saber, solo llama al abogado Andrés Mejer.